Dear Tiny Build Games, hi, it's me, Austin. What's up? I'm just your friendly neighborhood housing inspector who's here to check and make sure everything's up to code.
Hello, neighbor.
Okay, but seriously, I did consider making a video on the probably out-of-this-world building code violations this house would have, but that. Building codes in the United States tend to be different from county to county, and they're about half as complicated as a Game of Thrones theory subreddit post, so no, I didn't do that this week. But this did get me thinking, how the hell does this house exist? I mean, look at it. It's freaking ridiculous. There's like these hanging bits and what's this, an elevator and a windmill and a roller coaster? What did Dr. Seuss build this house? But you know, architecture is funny. Seemingly impossible things are done all the time. You can't just tell by looking at something necessarily whether or not it's possible. You have to measure things. You have to run your calculations, which is what I did. I spent the better part of a week surveying and plotting out the floor plan of the first 3 floors of the neighbor's house to near perfection. Every wall took several measurements and then double checks on those measurements. It was grueling, it was painful, and it was worth it until the motherfuckers at Tiny Build released Alpha 4 and undid all my motherfucking work. Ah! That's fine. Deep breaths. Thankfully, most of the first 3 floors were unchanged. Horrifically, however, they added like a billion more floors and weird subclosets and just But that's fine. I spent an entire week of the next week measuring that, and I swear to God, if you release Alpha 5 undoing everything in the next several days, I will lose my freaking mind! Besides being reasonably certain that the cold that I have right now is due to the late nights and stress involved with undertaking this task, I got it done. I have all 10 floors of this monstrosity plotted out, with an accuracy with a pretty slim margin for error, and that being said, Tiny Build? Hello Neighbor makes no goddamn sense. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Pixel measurements are the lifeblood of my show and game theory, and I'm gonna give you a tip you can try out for yourself at home if you wanna mess around like we do. If you're gonna measure something, you're gonna need a ruler. The creme de la creme of in-game rulers are, of course, the canon height of characters. When a developer says this character is exactly 155 centimeters tall, boy howdy, you are in business. The next best thing you can hope for is some sort of universal standard that's in-game. Something that exists in our world that is always the same due to copyright or some other legal regulations. Or sometimes you're lucky and you find an actual ruler, although I can't recall that ever actually happening in a game I needed it in. In any case, Hello Neighbor has none of that. No rulers, no canon heights, and everything's so freaking cartoonish in scale that you can't make any presumptions about anything. Everything's weird, which makes measuring impossible. Or so you'd think. There's one thing, one tiny little thing that once I discovered it, unlocked the potential for this episode and made what I thought was impossible possible. What was this tiny thing, you might ask? Simple. Milk. For indescribable reasons, almost everything in Hello Neighbor is now in Russian, which, you know, makes finding building inspection codes even more onerous. But before Alpha 4, things were in English. And while snooping around in my neighbor's house like a complete jackass with no sense of propriety or respect of people's personal belongings, I found milk in the fridge. And right there, in plain old English, it says, plain as day, gallon of milk. What? You don't seem as excited as I am. So what, Austin? It's a gallon of milk. Big frickin' whoop. Yeah, but Guys, a gallon is a measurement of volume, which is how much space something takes up. So like a ruler measures distance in one direction, right? It's a one-dimensional measuring device. Volume, by contrast, takes measurements from 3 directions. So knowing that this is a gallon, or 0.0038 cubic meters, we can work our way backwards to figure out the exact dimensions of this milk bottle, which ultimately will allow us to measure the entire world. I freaking love my job! Frustratingly, this bottle has gone to hell. Jesus, neighbor man, can you not grip the center of the carton like a complete ass? He's probably drinking it right from the carton, judging by how many the guy just leaves laying all over his house. Use a glass, you heathen! Anyway, the bottle being squished complicates our math somewhat. We gotta measure the dimensions of the carton to get the volume of its squished rectangle, then remove the volume of the indentations, blah blah blah, which ultimately gives us a final height of 21 centimeters and a width of 14 centimeters. Now, I could have just used milk cartons to measure everything, but positioning them correctly would have taken forever. Instead, I used the cartons to measure how large something much more manageable is. Cardboard boxes. Not only are these things frickin' everywhere in this game, they're much easier to line up with walls. I'll spare you the details of me measuring the house. It was a lot of long days and nights full of headaches and double and triple checking, adjusting, and pulling out my own hair. 3D games, man, remind me to never do this again. Anyway, after taking over 600 measurements, my God, I have it! Every square inch of this house is mapped, son, and it's here where the real work begins. The math of architecture is complicated, but the concepts are simple. You have a foundation either on the ground or in the basement. You have exterior walls, interior walls, and a roof. Sometimes you even have more than one floor. Exterior walls are what's called load-bearing, meaning they support something above them. This means that the roof and the floors above it, if it's multiple floors, are supported by the walls on the outside of the house. Frequently, weight from above is also carried by walls on the first floor. Load-bearing walls on the lower floors run perpendicular to the floor joists, and if they're designed to help support the house, they're usually reinforced with extra wood. You can't go messing around with these walls willy-nilly. They can be removed, but you usually have to compensate by supporting that weight somewhere else. In most houses, this is about as complicated as it gets. But in our neighbor's house, and actually in many others in the world, things are way more complicated. I mean, look at these, floating things? Like floors are just straight up spilling out into the air like this? Well, those aren't necessarily as ludicrous as they may first appear. These are called cantilevers, and they're actually pretty common in modern construction, although they're usually not this exaggerated. Cantilevers can be a cheap way to add more square footage, or what do they call it in countries that use a measurement system that makes actual sense? Square meters? Anyway, cantilevers can increase the livable space in a house that's cheaper than just building a larger house, because you don't have to pour a larger foundation. You can just straight up put concrete out of your budget, since you don't need to build a foundation that's underneath that floor. The physics of cantilevers is actually pretty fascinating. It's basically the same thing as a normal lever, but instead of moving up and down, cantilevers are free to flex and transfer their force back along the lever and into the fulcrum. In this case, the point where the floor meets the wall. In theory, the only limitations on how large a cantilevered floor is are the materials you use, how rigid they are, their shape. All of these things dictate how far out they can extend. Some of the cantilevers on the second floor are a bit extreme for a modern home, but they're within the realm of possibility. In spite of its absurdity, the first 2 floors of the neighbor's house get the official science stamp of approval. Now, the next 8 floors, things get questionable. Extreme cantilevers of tens of meters with what are these flimsy ass supports? Are you kidding me? But But upon looking at the floor plan and the support structures more closely, I discovered that, well, a respectable engineer, and I'm talking like the Einstein of engineers, could actually probably pull this off. It's definitely breaking some regulations, since most cantilevers are only supposed to extend out a few feet, but hell, someone who put a literal trolley in their house probably doesn't give a crap what the housing inspectors think. And if this is Russia, there's probably nobody who'd actually bother him at all anyway. As long as the supporting materials are strong enough to support the weight and there's enough counterweight on the opposite side, things should be good. The thing about cantilevers is that if you have 10 pounds on one side, you need to have at least 10 on the other to keep it rooted. Usually more, and especially more if the cantilever is architectural. That being said, this freaking house is huge. Like, seriously, all said and done, not counting the weirdo basement, this thing is over 4,300 square meters or over 46,000 square feet. If it weren't for the unseemly construction tactics and the general lack of stability of the thing, this thing solidly meets the requirements necessary to be considered a mansion. I mean, this thing is over a third larger than Luigi's mansion. Damn! So, while some of these lower floor cantilevers are a bit extreme and are propped up by seemingly the most lazily installed beams ever, it's conceivable that there's more than enough weight on the opposite side of these cantilevers to keep them upright. So, surprisingly, I can't outright say that the neighbor's house is definitely impossible. Improbable? Sure. Expensive? Hell yes. And apparently it's also a magnet for home intrusion enthusiasts, so I'm guessing that if it were put on the market, it wouldn't sell for too much. Well, that's kind of a boring way to finish a video. I was kind of planning on— Wait a minute! What the f*** is that thing? Is a giant tank of water. Oh crap, this changes everything. Why? Because water is freaking heavy. On top of it, this is a tank in the middle of one of the more extreme and precariously balanced cantilevers on the 5th floor. Oh God! Measuring the tank while full, this thing is filled with 56,000 gallons or 215,000 liters of water, weighing over 215 metric tons, aka a metric ton. For American plebeians like myself, this is almost 500,000 pounds of water. This may seem extreme, but honestly, it's not. People who are really into exotic fish often have to be really careful about where they place their large fish tanks because, again, water is freaking heavy. Putting a fish tank in the wrong place in your house can cause your floors to permanently sag. The weight that houses are rated to support is called its gravity load. That's the weight of the house and all its components, which is called the dead load, added together with things like furniture, people, pets, and all sorts of other crap which can change at any moment. These things are called the live load. Now, as we mentioned earlier, these cantilevers, while a bit absurd, are kinda legit, in theory. But this changes everything. Cantilevers this long aren't meant to support this much weight, especially in a normal house. Just to confirm this, I ran some numbers. The floors of Hello Neighbor are really thin, but I gave them a generous 5 centimeters of thickness to work with. Measuring the amount of newtons acting on this cantilever by adding up the floors above using an average of 200 pounds per square foot, we can get a clear picture of where these loads are landing. And somewhere around the middle of the tank, the combined weight of the floors above is way more than the yield strength of steel beams a meter wide. Even if you had an entirely steel floor, this thing would probably snap. And if it didn't snap, it'd bend like a freaking paperclip. In fact, carbon nanotubes have the strongest rigidity known to man, and even they couldn't support this cantilever. Period. It's just too unstable. But let's say that somehow the neighbor discovered some sort of ultra-rigid material like my dick.
Hello, neighborino.
Anyway, let's say, just for fun, this could be supported without breaking. Remember earlier when I said that for every pound on a cantilever, there has to be at least 1 pound, if not more, on the other side to balance it out and keep it from falling apart? Well, taking all these floors and this gigantic frickin' tank of water combined, we have a total total weight of over 635 kilograms to balance out. For context, this is like 3 blue whales precariously balanced on a piece of wood. But there's plenty of floors on the other side, right? Yeah, kinda. All of them added together, though, only amounts to 478,000 kilograms. Crap! Oh, wait! What about that windmill? Nope! No good! Turns out that even frickin' giant wind turbines only weigh about 148,000 kilograms, which still puts us underweight, and this thing is way smaller than those. It's like 1/10 the size, putting us at almost 150,000 kilograms short. You know what that means? Even if we were to get lucky and manage to find a material rigid enough to support this thing, instead of it staying upright, it'd likely pull the entire upper half of the neighbor's house up like a hammer pulling a nail. This house should be flipping over. Thankfully, that wouldn't actually happen. What would actually happen is the supports would give out, sending thousands of gallons of water crashing to the ground, where it would create a massive crater, shatter the tank, and flood all the basements of the nearby homes. Fun! And even if all of these things would be possible to build under normal circumstances, there's no way this structure would be able to fight the one type of load we haven't talked about yet: wind load. Given a rough total height of 40 meters, ignoring this giant windmill, even during a calm day, this thing is going to be experiencing pretty strong winds due to what's called the wind gradient, which is science speak for as you go higher, winds get faster, which will be putting a constant and varying horizontal force on the house, which is so wide it would act like a giant sail on a boat, threatening to rip the top off. Just during a normal day, we're talking winds of over 30 miles per hour at that height, and during a thunderstorm, we're looking at 80-mile-per-hour winds. There's no way these flimsy supports won't snap like goddamn toothpicks and send several hundred metric tons of house blowing down the neighborhood. All of this could have been avoided just by putting the tank on the interior of the house. These weights, well, pretty intense, are way easier to support when we're talking regular old gravity loads. You can just keep slapping wooden beams and walls, or if you're feeling frisky, actually build them out with brick. In any case, I'm sorry to say it, Tiny Build, but this house is absolutely frickin' ridiculous. I still love you, though. Sincerely, Austin. Hey there everyone, thank you for watching my video on Hello Neighbor. I am hopped up on so much coffee right now because I have a really terrible cold because my germ incubator in the shape of a cute fat baby got me sick. Gave me their sickness, and I am so sick right now. If you want to know more about my process building this house, I'm actually going to be sharing the floor plan, PSD, and images on my Twitter account today, so follow me on AR Horrigan if you want the floor plan for yourself. It's pretty awesome, and it probably didn't get showcased enough in this video for as much time as it took me, so I want other people to appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to the Game Theorist channel if you haven't yet. Why haven't you do it now, son? Anyway, I'm gonna go. Thank you. Ask me your questions about other games in the comments, and I'm gonna go take way too much Dayquil. Woo!